evening, everybody, and welcome to Forum Focus. We have an exciting show for you tonight with Amanda Munday. She is the Executive Director of New Majority. That's going to be coming up in a little while after the break. But first, I want to kind of set the stage with respect to the overall state of civic engagement amongst young people right now in the political process. The last election campaign here in Canada saw a 9% increase, according to Elections Canada, with respect to youth voter turnout. And so certainly that dismissed a lot of the criticisms that were coming from those people who are in, I think, older demographics who often dismiss young people as being politically apathetic or being politically disillusioned. And certainly that is now harder to make that argument given the increase in youth voter turnout. And it begs the question, why 2025 for young people? Why was that the year that actually made them want to get out there and cast their ballot? And a lot of it comes down to the issues and what issues in particular young people were concerned about. In the 2025 election, we of course saw President Donald Trump have a very big influence with respect to his threats of tariffs on Canadian trade. And in Canada's case, they really didn't leverage some of the kind of resources that we have access to in Canada, like minerals and grain and oil, in the same way. And so all of a sudden, the conversation very quickly became about how can Canada survive when the US is being this kind of political wild card, if you will. And so it was very easy for young people to feel kind of the urgency of the moment. And the narrative was certainly crafted around that on both sides of the aisle, both liberals and conservatives. They crafted the narrative over the course of the election campaign to very much be about kind of how do we actually make it so that this is the main issue, even if there are other domestic issues that people are concerned about, like the cost of living or like housing or the environment or energy, or certainly a number of other issues as well that were really occupying the discourse at the time. And so young people right now, when it comes down to civic engagement, they are much more solutions focused. They care a lot more about the issues in many cases than they do about political parties or about slogans. And that's why even in the United States, you're starting to see a rise in support towards candidates in the 2026 midterms and the 2028 presidential election who are much more kind of anti-establishment, anti-party system, if you will, so to speak. And I think if you look to what's been happening in the United States recently, you can look to the state of Maine, where they have a Senate candidate there named Graham Plattner. And what he's doing is really kind of, I think, the envying, so to speak, what a lot of people right now in the media are kind of dismissing young people for. Because what young people are doing right now is they are doing things that other demographics aren't willing to engage with. They're turning to social media and they're engaging by posting their opinions there. And so when you look to candidates like Graham Plattner in Maine, or if you look to candidates like AOC, who is of course the congresswoman from the Bronx in New York, they are kind of harnessing what young people are looking for. They're meeting young people where they are. And that's one of the main issues that people who are running for office and politicians who are running for office have failed to do in the past. If you look to Joe Biden, of course, the 46th president, and many reasons as to why he was not as successful as he could have potentially been, a lot of it comes down to his support amongst young people. He didn't meet them where they were. He expected his advisors to do that for him. And if you look to someone like Donald Trump, you know, whether you are a Republican or a Democrat, a liberal or a conservative, a lot of people would attribute Donald Trump's success amongst young people to his ability to relate to them through social media, to his social media team even, and the advisors that he surrounds himself with. And so a lot of what kind of this 21st century political campaigning comes down to is treating social media as one of the main kind of factions of your campaign and bringing on social media advisors to help with that. And that's certainly something that Amanda Munday, through her work with New Majority, has been highlighting, but also through mobilization efforts and whether or not it is time to lower the voting age to the age of 16, given that really young people who are 16, young people who are 18, is there really much of a difference between the two of them? New Majority and Amanda Munday is making the case, of course, that when you're 16 years old, you pay taxes, you're a contributing member to society, you might be earning an income, and so in the same way you are when you're 18. The only difference is that when you're 16, those habits can be built a little bit earlier and more likely to continue when you're 18 and so on and so forth into some of your later years as well. We're also going to talk about online voting. Are some of the potential national security implications of that worth the risk when it comes down to making voting and the process more accessible to people? We're going to talk about all of that and more with Amanda Munday. She is, again, the Executive Director of New Majority. That conversation is coming up right after the break. Stay with us. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's episode of Forum Focus. I'm Wyatt Sharpe. Good to have you with us. Tonight's focus is civic engagement, how citizens participate in shaping their communities, influencing public policy, and strengthening democratic institutions at a time when trust in government and public discourse is being tested, especially even in recent weeks where the news has felt heavier than ever, from voter participation and grassroots advocacy to community organizing and digital activism. Civic engagement is evolving alongside the political and social challenges facing our society. As younger generations become more politically aware and new tools make participation more accessible than ever, questions remain about how to translate awareness into meaningful action that actually can be observed at the ballot box. And with all of that, how institutions can respond to an increasingly engaged public. And joining me now to discuss is Amanda Munday, the Executive Director of New Majority. Thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, nice to have you.
Of course. Let's just kind of, just for viewers who are watching, we last talked at a conference called the Next Campaign Summit, and we had a pretty similar conversation to the one I'm sure we're about to have. But I think it was just, in planning for this show, wanting to extend upon that conversation. So, anyways, I'm glad to have you with us. I want to just kind of start
Thanks.
out with where we are right now and kind of the political realm and how polarized it has become and how often toxic it has become. And with all of that, what your pitch would be to a young person as to why it is still important, but also relevant for them to want to get engaged in the process.
Yeah, that's a lot for one answer, but let me get started and unpack it for you. So if we look at the trends of voter engagement over, say, even the last 10 years, we had a peak in voter turnout, particularly around youth in 2015 when Prime Minister Trudeau federally was elected, and then we saw another decline in youth voter turnout. But even over past generations since 1993, voter turnout, particularly with young people, has been on the decline. And there's lots of reasons for that. COVID was a major factor. Elections Canada paused on campus voting for the 2021 federal election. And as you mentioned, trust in institutions, faith in our democratic practices have all eroded over time. And that it has a lot to do with how politicians interact with younger constituencies. It has a lot to do with young people caring deeply about their issues, facing what should be once in a generation major crises, and yet we're facing them every few
Mhm.
years, and not seeing the issues that young people care about reflected in the policies that politicians put out on platforms and campaigns and then through policy once they're elected. So I have a lot of empathy for young people who say, "Why should I vote? I don't know that my vote makes a difference." Or even if I do turn out because I care about voting, I won't see the issues that I care about reflected in politics. And that's all, frankly, very fair.
Mhm.
There's good news, though. So, in the 2025 federal election that just happened a year ago, we're right in going on the 1 year anniversary from the last federal election. We just had data released from Elections Canada in February that reported that youth voter turnout went up by
Mhm.
9.2% in the last federal election. My organization, New Majority, is taking full credit for that. So you're welcome. It was us. We did it entirely. But in all seriousness, what that speaks to me when I see voter turnout going up, I'll talk to you a bit about
Mhm.
how our organization works on voter turnout. But broadly speaking, what we're seeing is that the idea that young people are apathetic or that they don't care about politics or that they're not engaged is simply false. The data
Mhm.
doesn't show it. Talk to a young person, talk to a new voter, and they are very much engaged. Instead, what we're seeing is that lack of faith or trust in
Yeah.
institution erodes people's willingness to come out and participate.
Mhm.
And so it's as much on our politicians as it is on our democratic institutions to bolster our relationship with how we participate in democracy and how we feel that our voice matters and is heard.
And is it a fair
Now,
distinction to? Oh, sorry. I was just gonna say, is it a fair distinction to kind of? I mean, you're talking about young people aren't apathetic, but I mean, a lot of people might say young people are disillusioned, which is different than apathy. Can you maybe talk about that distinction too?
yeah, so when we're talking about disillusioned or disengaged, to me, I I'm all right. I celebrate someone's awareness in politics, in democracy, and civic engagement, but choosing not to participate. To me, that's different
Hmm.
than not being aware an election is happening, being so overwhelmed with issues, you're not aware, uh, you don't know how to vote, you can't find the resources or understand what's involved in voting because you haven't done it for the first time.
Hmm.
We distinguish between unengaged, for any host of reasons for being unengaged, overwhelmed being one, and disillusioned. What's important when you talk about disillusionment or even polarization that you mentioned at the top of the question, there's a really interesting report from Digital Public Square, which is another national nonprofit organization, also nonpartisan. They released a report in January that found Canadians' perception of polarization is, in fact, a number of points greater than our actual ideological polarization,
Hmm.
meaning we think we're further apart on the political spectrum than we actually are when you measure someone's ideological or political beliefs. So to me, when we're talking about disillusioned citizens, when we're talking about voting and civic participation, we need to
Yeah.
look at access to information, trusted information sources, where we're getting our information about party platforms, where we're accessing debates,
Hmm.
where we're talking to the candidates and finding out more about the issues than what we're being
Yeah.
served on social media, because the perception
Hmm.
of disagreement leading to I can't have a conversation. I don't want to get into a heated fight.
Yeah.
People are afraid. They're afraid to have conversations because we believe we're so polarized that
Hmm.
we can't find common ground. But the data shows ideologically we're actually as Canadians not that polarized. We can have
Hmm.
different views, but in fact there's a lot of systems at play that make us feel a lot more
Yeah.
distant from politics than we are, and that's why organizations like mine and others who are doing important civic engagement work are focused on the logistics of
Yeah.
getting people to the polls, not so much on the why you should vote,
For sure.
because if you're
Amanda, we have to go to break
engaged.
really quickly. We have to go to break really quick. We're going to pick it up right after, and I want to talk to you about your organization and the great work you're doing. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Forum Focus. I'm joined again by Amanda Munday of New Majority. Amanda, I very rudely cut you off before the break, so I'm going to kind of put it back to you. But
Okay.
maybe if you want to talk to us a little bit kind of about the work that your organization, New Majority, does in terms of incentivizing, but also showing young people why it is important for them to actually want to get out there and participate and vote and do the wonderful things that we have the freedoms to do here in Canada.
Yeah, so my organization, New Majority, is a national nonpartisan nonprofit organization, which is a whole bunch of words smashed together, which means that really we as an organization focus on doing one thing over and over again really well. And that is we help unengaged voters get to the polls. And you might say, why do we need an organization that helps people to vote? Everybody
Hmm.
has a right to vote, and don't they know an election's happening? It's not true. When we are on the ground talking to unengaged voters, new voters, when we're on campuses, when we're places where young people are, 50% of the people we talk to on the ground are not aware an election's happening.
Yeah.
If you look at municipal elections, by elections, turnout is averages around 30%. So if turnout is 30%, even less are aware the election itself is happening.
Yeah.
So what we've seen time and time again is to get more people to the polls, it's not about convincing someone for a motivation to vote or not vote.
Hmm.
What it is making people aware an election's happening and then making it really easy to quite literally walk to the polls. So my organization focuses on ground canvassing. We hire young people and we pay them to stand on campuses, outside parks, festivals, gyms, walking distance from polling stations, and they're peer to peer having conversations with young people where they quite literally approach and say, "Do you know an election's happening? And can
Yeah.
I help you to make a plan to vote?" Because we know that if you make a plan to vote, that's where your polling station is, how you're going to get there, when you're going to go. all of the data shows you're far more likely to actually cast your ballot. And making a plan to vote is one of the most effective ways to increase turnout. You don't
Yeah.
need to look at motivation.
So is it a question of, I mean, because I mean, we're talking a little bit about accessibility here. And I mean, if I think to like my own school, for example, where you have people who are in grade 12, they're 18 years old, and they could theoretically go out and vote on election day, but they're in class and they have all these other competing priorities. And I mean, I think to a certain extent, like, and going back to what you were talking about before, it's not that young people don't care about the political issues, but it's kind of mobilizing that to get them to want to take that kind of concern and that passion for whatever issue it is to kind of the ballot box and actually have them express their concerns. So, I mean, how much of it is about accessibility? And then I guess, how do we make it as accessible as possible? And I guess this isn't even just for young people. You could make the argument for other demographics as well.
Yeah. So I'll tell you one of the strategies that I employ when we're talking about how do we get somebody to the polls
Hmm.
is I immediately start with how are you feeling today? And is there something you're anxious about?
Yeah.
Almost always the answer is yes. There's
Hmm.
something you're anxious about. There's something that's on your mind.
Yeah.
And then
Hmm.
if you're a voter, if you're eligible, the next response is do you want to feel better today?
Yeah.
Because we know the best antidote to anxiety is action. And one action that everybody can take on the issues that you care about, whether it's rent, tuition, transportation, climate, mental health, education, is to vote.
Yeah.
You get to feel better today about those issues because you took an action, regardless of who wins, to say these issues matter to me. And by casting your ballot, you're more likely to pay attention to your elected official in your riding and how they vote on those future issues. And
Yeah.
then our organization does another step where we try to keep you engaged further from election day on meeting with your elected officials, on talking to volunteer organizations. We sort of call it an off ramp into community. Those are for people who want to be more engaged. But really, it
Yeah.
comes down to do you just want to feel better? Voting is a really good way to do that. And on accessibility, one of the campaigns that I've been championing in the House of Commons
Hmm.
online, my team's been working on it provincially and federally, is on Vote Anywhere.
Mm.
And what that is helping to broaden where you can vote. Because one of the barriers that we come up with anecdotally all the time on the ground is a voter, especially students who have that
Yeah.
voter card
For
and
sure.
one location to vote in and they go to the station, it's the wrong location. Well, if you've gone out of your way or you have a small window in between classes or you've got to get to work and you find out you're on the wrong voting location, how likely are you to look up and go to the right one? Or are you going to abandon and
Hmm.
say, this is too hard, forget it? There are some students and other voters who don't want to vote in a faith based or an education location. Fair. You can vote by special ballot. You can go to an elections office, but those are all barriers that make it harder to get people to the polls.
Yeah.
So we really support the idea that if you can vote anywhere, you're making it easier for people to cast their ballot. And that is a lot of the way there to increasing turnout.
All right. We're going to take another quick break. Amanda Monday is with us once more after this. Stay with us. Welcome back. I'm joined once more by Amanda Monday, the executive director at New Majority. Amanda, just to kind of close off the conversation, because before the break, we were talking about accessibility and we've been talking a little bit about kind of mobilization strategies for young people to get out there and what are kind of the most effective ways. One of the kind of consistent things that comes up pretty regularly, I guess there's two of them, is should we lower the voting age down to 16 so that young people can kind of form these habits earlier in their life? So I guess I'm kind of curious to just first off get your thoughts on that, and then we'll pick up the other one after.
Yeah, absolutely. The charter says that every citizen has the right to vote. And so it's actually on proponents against Vote 16 to prove why 16-year-olds shouldn't be able to
Hmm.
vote. It is their legal right. And we're absolutely in support of the Vote 16 movement. Young people are working at the age of 16, they're paying taxes, they're contributing to many different levels of
Yeah.
civic engagement. They absolutely should have a right in how our policies are built.
And do you think, because the other piece of that I was going to ask about was online voting, and it's a little bit different because it's kind of, it's not really about eligibility so much as it is about a means to kind of vote. But I think they're related because I think a lot of young people would turn to online voting and it would make it much more accessible for them. And again, we talked about this at the conference we were at together. What are kind of the pros and cons of that debate?
Yeah, so I think we have to have some nuance when we talk about online voting because
Hmm.
of this challenge we're facing around trust in institutions.
Yeah.
So one of the things that Canada does so well is we have a high degree of integrity and trust in our elections. Canada does such a wonderful job
Hmm.
in making sure that our elections are free, they're fair, and they're protected from foreign interference. So on one hand, I'm a huge proponent in making it easier for more people to vote. So, of course, online voting makes sense with that. And I'm very aware of the risks with foreign interference and foreign
Yeah.
actors with security and data. So, my answer is yes and. Yes, it's
Yeah.
good. And let's not make sure we don't want to create more problems when it comes to trust in institutions. And I think while we could do online voting and it might be great, it also we can mitigate some of the efforts in low turnout by engaging young people in person.
All right, we will leave it there. Amanda Munday, she is the executive director of New Majority. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
All right, we're going to leave it there. All right, and that is going to do it for Forum Focus tonight with Amanda Munday. Again, she is the executive director at New Majority. A great conversation talking about the voting age, online voting, how to increase accessibility, and really drive home some of those mobilization efforts for young people to get them out to the polls. That's going to do it for Forum Focus tonight. We'll see you next time.